All right, this is very exciting because I found another Alain Connes lecture where it was from a blog. I was looking for his PowerPoint notes, and or it was listed as a slide, and I remember I had seen them before, but so this is what I found, and it's actually from a 1997 document, so it's way earlier than his actual talk. But then again, his book was published in 2001, and that's when I first encountered his work. So this proves that he already had the concept before he explicitly discussed it in the 2001 book. And so this talk is not the Music of Shapes lecture that he first gave in 2011, but he gave this talk in 2015 as a video lecture, and he said that he waited to a long time before he gave this talk in public because it's such a strong message about why time, why do we feel time is passing. And he said before that if we study music, then it helps us to understand why time is passing. And he doesn't go into the music as much in this talk because he's focused more on the actual physics side of the frequency, the noncommutative frequency. But then if you listen to the actual video lecture versus just reading the PowerPoint slides, then he does actually talk about the music theory, which is just awesome because it really corroborates what I have been claiming, but it also clarifies, it takes it to a deeper level than so he references the same study that is the basis of his Music of Shapes lecture on the can we hear the shape of a drum, and the answer is no, because it can be the same frequency that's isospectral, but it's not it's a different shape. And so in the lecture he gives the different shapes of the drum head that's three-dimensional, and then he says that they can be the same spectrum as in the same scale, but the scale is the different shapes are an octave apart in this case. So he's got like a double octave within an octave, and so I will quote him to clarify this. And so he says that he's comparing this with the light frequencies, and so the whole lecture was about how this whole concept originated from his PhD thesis, where he was studying the von Neumann analysis of quantum mechanics based on factorization as a non-commutative different classification of the factorization. So in the matrix math, you have the type 2 classification, which would be the inner product of the matrix as a non-commutative cross factorization or cross multiplication. So then he says that the blue-red shape of which is these two comparison of these two scales, it's not possible for the type 2 shape, but it is possible for the type 1. So the type 1 is basically it's the double octave, which is what you find in music theory. So if you know music theory, you know what he's talking about here. And then the so the type 2 is it reveals the non-commutative frequency. So you have the same frequency, but the geometry takes it out of the octave. And so he says, I'm quoting him here, so this is like the piano, if you want, in which you can play in both cases, because there are 3 different kinds of notes. But somehow I will call something a chord if there exists a point at which the corresponding eigenfunctions both don't vanish. And so that's what he means by the scale, or the system that is based on the squaring of the frequencies. And so he says, or the inverse frequencies. And so he says, and so it can either be 3, which he's talking about in terms of music is the perfect fifth. So in other words, when he says 3 different kinds of notes in relation to the piano, if you had listened to his music lecture, you know that he's referring to the perfect fifth. So he's talking about the inversion of the perfect fifth. So he's saying that there's 3 different notes, meaning you have the octave, and then you have the exponential of the perfect fifth, and then you have the inverse of the perfect fifth as 2/3. And so the 3 as the note, the 3 different kinds of notes, is relation to the scale based on 0 and infinity that you're squaring. And so so he's talking about the notes as the chords before you're squaring it as a scale. So the type 3 of von Neumann is the squaring, and the type 2 is the non-commutative of the 3 different kinds of notes as the music of the chords. So it turns out that the chord, which is blue-red, is not possible for shape 2, but it is for shape 1. So what he's referring to there again is in music theory. If you know this, if you have a 2/3 and a 3/2, the 2/3 is not allowed because it's in a different octave than the 3/2. So it would be a subharmonic or an undertone. So essentially the frequency is longer than the chord, and that's why it's not allowed. And also because based on the geometry, if you have a scale, then the 3/2 is a C to G as the overtone, and whereas the 2/3 is the undertone. But if you have the double octave, then you can have both of those frequencies within the double octave, and then you can convert them to the same system or scale by squaring them. And that's why they're allowed in the type 1, because it's the double octave. As you can see, it's the 4, and so when you're squaring them, you got the 4 versus the 2 for the scale of the type 2 that's non-commutative. So then he says, if you want a new invariant, it's intimately related to a point, and the point in that view, which is spectral, is given by the correlations between the eigenvariables. So that the points, in fact, because after all we want to say where we are, we not only have to give the space, the geometry, but we also have to specify the point where we are. An emission matrix of scalar products of spinors of the point where we are. you have eigenspinors, and you look at the corresponding matrix, and that would be exactly what you need to look at that point. So the eigenspinors are a 1 or a 0, or a, or that's non-commutative as the inner product. So it changes, 0, 1 or 1 or 0. And since it's the imaginary axis as the time, so you can have the negative frequency in the imaginary axis. So that's what the non-commutative frequency is, the 2/3 as the perfect fifth compared to the 1. So again, that's why the type 2 is not allowed, the shape 2. And then the emission matrix is for the squaring as the scalar, but the absorption matrix of the spectrum is the non-commutative. And so then so this is just what I was saying. The point is the emission matrix scalar product of the spinors of the eigenvariables. Because the blue-red is an octave difference as a chord with the same frequency of 3, that is non-commutative. Therefore, it is not allowed for the shape 2 as the continuous conversion. That is not an octave difference. In other words, 3/2 is C to G, but 2/3 is C to F as the octave of 3/4. So for the type 1 is the double octave. So the octave is the 0 equivalence as the squared symmetry, or even, while since it's even, then you're able to just have the same scale or spectrum that's squared as a replication. But then as the subsystem, the subspace or subsystem, you have an odd, which is the perfect fifth or the 3 against the octave as the 2. And so that's what he says explicitly, if it's like the piano, there exists, then you have 3 different kinds of notes, and then he says that it could be 3, which is the non-commutative transposition. And that's just what he talks about in the so he's saying that he's referring back to von Neumann, and he's saying that they're discrete variables as the spinors. So it's essentially 0, 1, and 1 and 0, but they're since they're non-local, they're in an infinite space. And he says that the reason that they're inner fluctuations, and he says that I believe that the true variability is quantum, and that the true variability is exactly the fact that when you take a quantum observable, it doesn't have a single value, that it has many possible values which are given by the spectrum of the operator. So that's referring to the non-locality. And that belief, once you have found this, plus the fact that the discrete variables could not coexist with the continuous variables without the quantum formalism. So that's again referring to the measurement problem of having to square the inverse frequencies in order to get the amplitude for the probability. And then he says, how can the times that we know a match from this considerations, and in a very strange manner, it will be related to the end of the talk. So he's saying how he's going to get back to that. I know it's difficult, but in my mind, it's backed up by an intuition that comes from many years of work, and this is very difficult to transmit. So I will try. We are wrong to try to write things in time because of our minds, which are logical. We are always trying to reconstitute a logical past. just because we want to feel happy about it. What I'm saying is that things may be different and that there could be a fundamental quantum variability. So he's saying that the truth of reality is that the past and the future overlap through the inner cross factorization that's non-commutative in the matrix math. And so the system is the octave that's commutative, and it's a problem of factorization of the inner space of dividing a system into two subsystems. The observable space-time emerges from the factorization. The type 2 is a space or scale that's classified by a real number dimension. And so that's again referring to this need to square the imaginary number, because then it factors out the reverse time and negative frequency. And so that real dimension can either be bounded dimension like 0 and 1, or an infinity like 0 and infinity. So the infinity is the non-commutative, and then the bounded is the type 1 that is then a converted to the type 3 or something. I can't that part of not, but it says like so you take the inverse of the exponential as the factor. These are my notes. I'm not quoting them directly. So then he refers back to, he says this was from his PhD in 1972, where he was proving that time evolution was not based on the symmetrics, the symmetry of space, but on the non-commutativity itself, as time evolution from the negative entropy thermodynamics of the imaginary number in the mathematics. So the time evolution only changes locally from the inner automorphisms, which is the non-commutative cross products in the matrix. And so then that was his PhD, and then he said he continued on because of this discovery. He focused on the non-commutative math, and that's why he won the Fields Medal in 1982, because he built on that PhD thesis. So he says, my feeling is that the passing of the time could very well come from the fact that we are unable to know all observables in the quantum mechanics. We are unable to control all the observables of the universe. We are only able to control a small part of them, which is a factorization of this kind. And because of our lack of knowledge of the full observables, we have the feeling that time is passing. So this is like a really heavy, strong statement. So he's saying time is emergent and a corollary of our lack of knowledge. And there's a relation between thermodynamics and the Big Bang. So by time, he means the causal direction of time as space-time based on classical physics and relativity. And here I quote the Qigong master F.E.P. Chao. I feel that the past and the present and the future is all in one state. They are operating at different frequency levels. It isn't the past here, the present here, and the future here. We are all at one state. The past, present, and future are all here. That's why some people have deja vu. So if he's talking about frequency, she's talking about frequency. This is what Oliver Costa de Beauregard would argue, is that because of this negentropy of the what he was calling it the amplitude transitions from Feynman, but that's the same concept as the inner cross products of the noncommutative matrices. And he's saying that you're able to then access that on a biological level and therefore experience the future as a negative entropy energy that then can be absorbed in the body. And of course, Connes doesn't talk about that, but he does say some related stuff about as I mentioned, the music. He's saying the music is how we can understand why this is happening. So he's saying out of this problem, which is a purely mathematical problem, von Neumann classified factors type 1 to type 3. Then came the time evolution and the uniqueness of the time evolution, which completely you weren't allowed to classify